All right, well, hey, folks, I'm going to try to walk you through some of the slides that I would have shown you if we had had time in class, but again, this doctor's appointment I have on October 1st is preventing us from having time to do that. So here's sort of my walking you through some of Barry Schwartz's writings on critiquing evolutionary biology, behaviorism, and modern economic theory. So far, we've just mostly been talking about understanding those theories. Schwartz does a really good job of just helping you to understand the theories. And this is an important thing I do hope you take from the class and your education in general, is that you should never criticize what you don't understand. That's actually a line from a Bob Dylan song. It's a good line. Don't criticize what you don't understand, because then you're just an idiot. You're just being arrogant or, wrong-headed. It's not good to do that. You should understand the other person's argument, really understand it and understand the good in it before you critique it. Otherwise, you're not going to build any, you're not going to move humanity forward anywhere, any little bit by your disagreement. In our political disagreements, this is a big thing. But Schwartz is not like that. He does a really good job. He really does understand the arguments that he's ultimately going to critique. So now we get to the punchline. Here's the critique. Big picture. So the Hobbesian three-headed beast we talked about, the Lord of the Flies thing, the three-headed beast being evolution, behaviorism, and economics. So Hume warned that we should not confuse the domain of facts and the domain of morals. In other words, we shouldn't confuse what is with what ought to be. This is called the naturalistic fallacy. I mentioned this already in class, but just reminding you. And evolution, behaviorism, and economics suggest that the study of man can be the same as the study of the natural world. It can be a scientific study. The naturalistic fallacy is very easy to make then, when we're seeing the world through these lenses, behaviorism, evolution, and economics. Yet the way things are, the is affects the ought. For example, children are not afforded equal rights to adults because of what they're understood to be. Kids aren't allowed to go buy cigarettes, because they don't have the same brains and discretion and wisdom as adults do. Adults can make that choice if they really want to smoke. Kids, we don't trust to do that, or to drink alcohol, for that matter, because of what they are. Kids are different than adults. So what they are determines their ought. They ought not drink at all. We don't let them drink at all. Adults, they can drink if they want. That's how it ought to be because of what we are. We're wise enough, hopefully, to decide how to use alcohol appropriately. So science, over the past 300 years, has become an authority that is widely trusted, and it does tell us what humans are. In our society, we think that. So it informs our ought a bit, at least. So here's an example of a guy on YouTube. He's going to show you,
in order to see.
Holy cow. Look at that. A feather and a bowling ball are dropping at the same speed. Okay, great. He's reproducing Galileo's experiment that he did a long time ago. He showed, gravity is pulling the same on the feather as is pulling on the bowling ball. Great. They accelerate towards the Earth at the same rate. So analogous to that experiment, what is human nature like in a vacuum? What is human nature like without culture? Well, we talked about this. Hobbes's answer was, we're the Lord of the Flies. Without culture, we would be vicious and killing each other, grabbing for power. Rousseau said, no, we were the noble savage. We would cooperate with each other without culture. But both of those guys agreed that humans are selfish right now. Rousseau thought that culture was causing us to be selfish, and Hobbes thought we were naturally selfish. So the scientific study of human nature suggests that Hobbes is correct, that selfishness is permanent. It's not about our culture, because these three things don't really have too much, to do with culture. Our genes, cause us to be selfish from evolutionary perspective. Behaviorism says the law of effect causes us to be selfish, or reinforcements basically cause us to be selfish. And in economics, man just maximizes self-interest. That's all causing us to be selfish, and it's not our culture. So that's the big picture view, that we're these selfish creatures because of these three domains of science, of evolution, behaviorism, and economics. So now let's critique. Or I'll walk you through Schwartz's critique. So we'll start with evolutionary biology. So one problem with that, he talks about Richard Dawkins a lot in the critiquing evolution chapter. So he says, Dawkins' constraint on perfection sounds compelling, but with no guiding principle for what can count as constraint and what can count as selected, evolutionary theory is too flexible. So let me walk you through what that means. Constraints on perfection is how evolutionary theorists like Richard Dawkins would respond to the criticism that, gee willikers, why aren't salmon, let's take a salmon, why aren't salmon more fit than they are? They've been evolving for millions of years. Why don't they pass on more of their genes to more offspring and be even more fit? Why do they have to do this thing where they, swim up a river and they essentially destroy their insides as they're swimming up this river when they spawn? Salmon swim up a river from the sea to fresh water, and then they have their babies in the fresh water. But on the journey, they have to swim so hard upstream that they die. So it's like, why do they do that? They should have evolved not to need to swim up the stupid stream by now, right? And then they could have passed on multiple generations of their genes. Every year they could spawn instead of just doing it once in their life. And they could pass on more versions of themselves. So that would be more fit, right? Why hasn't evolution made that happen? Well, the evolutionary theorists would say, well, no, that's a constraint on perfection. The reason they haven't evolved that is because there was this constraint there. It wouldn't have worked out for them to do that because there were other fish, that were eating all the food in the ocean, so they had to go up and, or that would have eaten their babies in the ocean, so that's why they had to swim upstream or something. The problem is that you can say, like any animal that isn't perfectly fit, you can say there's a constraint on perfection. So salmon spawning is an example, but you could say it like with menopause too. Like, why do women get menopause? Why in their 40s or 50s do women cease to be fertile? Wouldn't it be more evolutionarily fit for them to be able to pass on their genes their entire life? Like Abraham's wife Sarah apparently did. She was 90 and she had a kid. Why don't we do that anymore? Why can't we have kids when we're 90? That would pass on a lot more versions of our genes if we're a woman, Well, the answer to that is, from an evolutionist, would say, well, it's because grandmothers are good for survival. So the notion that you cease having your own kids at midlife, but then you've acquired all this wisdom and you can actually help your kids raise their kids. You can be a good grandmother, and then those grandchildren have your genes and you're helping them pass on your genes. But whichever one it was, if you had lifetime fertility or if you have menopause, the evolutionary biologist would be able to say, oh, this is why that happens, because it's more fit this way. You can explain them both, you see? Even death. Death is maximizing because it allows us to pass away and no longer be eating food and stuff that our children would be eating, and they presumably take the best versions of the genes of me and my wife, so they get to eat the food that I'm no longer eating up because I'm dead, and they're like improving the species with the next generation. So anything you can say is maximizing fitness. And that makes it so that evolution is unable to predict a species' future. Because if it can explain any trait, then it cannot really predict anything. Because whatever happens in the future, it'll be able to explain it. There's nothing that could happen that it wouldn't be able to explain. So it doesn't really have any strong hypotheses for how animals will evolve in the future. So that's a pretty big weakness. And notice, so for all these, Schwartz is criticizing these scientific theories on their own scientific grounds. He's not saying, well, it doesn't say that in the Bible. The Bible is worthless for critiquing science. The Bible might give you some ideas. If you believe the Bible, you trust it. It might give you the sense that something is true, but you can't talk to a scientist who doesn't believe in the Bible and convince them with the Bible. You need to leave the Bible aside. You can let it influence you if you trust it, but you need to engage the science in the language of science, and that's what Schwartz is doing here. So this is good. I want you guys to be able to do this in your lives, to look at scientific theories that you may disagree with or have an inkling are suspect, and not just dismiss them because you don't think they're Christian or something like that. Critique them on the grounds of science itself. So that's what Schwartz is doing. Anything can be explained, as I said in the last slide. Sexual reproduction is one more example. Why do we have sexual reproduction? Why does it have to be two animals in a species have to get together to mix up their genes together and then pass them on? Why don't we have asexual reproduction where I can just, make my own babies myself as often as I want without the need for another animal to help me make the baby? A lot of animals do that, but humans don't. So why is that? You can explain either one, sexual or asexual reproduction, as being more fit. This is a quick argument Schwartz gives, which I don't think is the greatest, but he's trying here to criticize evolution on its own scientific terms. He says there is no cockroach. So, for example, cockroaches don't exist, he says, and no animal exists. He uses the example of a cockroach. It's a temporary thing. There's no such thing as cockroach nature, just like there's no such thing as human nature, because humans are in the process of evolving. They're changing. The species is changing over time. Cockroaches are changing over time. There won't be cockroaches in 10 million years maybe, because they'll evolve into some other critter, or they'll go extinct and another animal will replace them in like the ecosystem. So I don't know. I don't really like Schwartz's argument here. I think it's kind of a weak argument, since cockroaches and we do have certain traits that are genetically determined, and maybe that'll change in 100,000 years, but right now we are the way that we are. So I'm giving you an example. Barry Schwartz isn't perfect. He doesn't, I don't think, make a strong point there. Okay. One more from evolution, or at least one more. Here's a problem with evolution. Culture determines our behavior more than genes do. So he says elephants all over the world behave similarly, but people all over the world don't. That's because of culture. People all over the world have the same genes as each other, basically, but they have different cultures, so that really affects their behavior, whereas that doesn't happen for elephants. One of the things that changes from culture to culture is how altruistic we are, or whether we're selfish. And he talks about the prisoner's dilemma. That's a game where, you and I are both caught, in the game by the authorities. And we might get sent to jail, And the question is, am I going to rat you out? Am I going to say, yeah, she did it? Or are you going to rat me out and say, you're going to say he did it? And the game works something like this, where if you rat me out, you get a plea deal. You only get 1 year in jail, but I get 10 years in jail. And likewise, if I rat you out, I only get 1 year in jail, but you get 10 years in jail. So you don't want to be the one who gets ratted out by the other one. So it's kind of about like whether you trust me. But if neither of us rats each other out, we both get no prison time at all. So you should not rat anyone out if you trust the other person. So that's like being altruistic, is not ratting anyone out in this case, even though that's a strange version of altruism to kind of lie, but I guess in this case it is. Or am I going to rat you out to make sure that I get, at worst, 1 year in prison? That would be selfish. And depending on how likely I think you are to rat me out, that'll affect how likely I am to be altruistic or selfish in the prisoner's dilemma. And our cultures in real life, this happens. How altruistic we're going to be is determined by the rules of the game in our culture, how much I trust other people in my culture and stuff. So culture is really determining this trait of selfishness or altruism more so than our genes are. That's another critique. Um, yeah, this is another somewhat superfluous point. It's not the most important point, but some cultures do. This is, again, with the idea that cultures determine our behavior more so than genes. Some cultures choose really non-maximizing strategies for kin. Remember, we talked about kin selection a class or two ago? That's the idea that, if I do a mating call and I'm a bird, I'm helping my kin to survive, the people that have similar genes to me. So even if I die, I'm kind of passing on my genes by allowing all my relatives to survive since they have similar genes to me. There's some cultures where my second cousin, who is a male, is considered close kin, and I would sacrifice for him and allow him to live in my house and give him my food and stuff. But my sister isn't close kin. So in reality, my sister shares way more genes with me than my second cousin, who is male, does. So this is not a fitness maximizing strategy. Again, this isn't the strongest argument by Schwartz, but it's, maybe a decent argument that some of the altruistic strategies are not really in line with what evolution would predict, which is that the closer you are to my sharing actual genes with me, the more I'll sacrifice for you and be altruistic for you. And I think this is getting to the end here of evolution. In fact, our brains seem to have done most of their recent evolving after culture and language arrived. So that's an important one. So thinking back to Hobbes and Rousseau, and which one are we, in a vacuum? Are we selfish or are we cooperative? Are we a noble savage or are we, Lord of the Flies? A person without culture wouldn't be a savage. He'd be a basket case, a fish out of water. Fish evolved in water. We evolved in culture. We evolved in the culture that has language. So we need a rich social structure to flourish and even to survive. So the notion of extracting man or woman from culture and seeing what they really like deep down, aside of culture, it doesn't even make sense because we evolved in culture. We became what we are in culture. So culture is intrinsic to what we are. There you go. So this is basically what I just said. So we can influence whether other people act selfishly or morally by how we shape culture. So it's an ought thing, not an is thing. Next are a few slides I was going to give you about this guy, Andy Goslar, and the Gaia theory. I think I'm going to save these for later, okay, for the next unit. So you don't have to know these for this exam. I'm just going to go right past them. And please don't let me forget to tell you about these for the next exam. I'm going to talk about 4 different worldviews, one of which is organicism. For the next exam, you don't have to know this now. And I'm going to talk about Andy Goslar as an example of an organicist. So we'll skip him for now just because, this is a video and I want to cut a little bit of the material and save it for when I can teach you it in person later. Okay, so next we've done evolution, the critique of evolution. Now let's do the critique of economics. Again, critiquing economics on its own terms. Intuitively, it makes sense that people prefer one thing over another. So that's the rational economic man or woman has preferences, that idea. But it doesn't actually predict behavior very well. For example, there's a limitless list of what you can do with $50. Remember, I told you last class I had lost my watch and I was thinking of spending $400 and buying another watch, which thankfully I have not done. I think that would be a bit of a rash decision. But what am I going to do with the $400? Am I going to, maybe give it away to a charity? Or am I going to buy, firewood with it to heat my house this winter? What am I going to do with the money that I have? It's really hard to predict, even with economics. You can't really do it. And we talked about this already, critiquing economics, that you wouldn't always buy the cheapest ice cream. Sometimes you'd buy the more expensive ice cream because you think it's better. That's definitely true for wine. If you've ever gone and bought wine, you don't usually buy the cheapest wine because you assume it's crap. But, you know, how many people can really appreciate the differences between, you know, a $50 bottle of wine and a $15 bottle of wine, or even a $7 bottle of wine? Most people, I think, would tell you, I can tell. But if you did a blind taste test, I don't think many of them could. And they just think that they're primed. You know, it's one of these biases that you learn in Psych 180, that you're primed to think it's going to be good, so you think it's good when it's an expensive bottle of wine you spent $50 on. All right. I already told you this too. We can burn right through this slide. We don't maximize, we satisfy. We do good enough. There's a TED Talk by Barry Schwartz called The Paradox of Choice, which I haven't shown you yet, but I'm going to pause right now and pull that up on YouTube so that I can have you pause this video and watch that TED Talk, if I can get my mouse to work. Yep, here it is. It's an early TED Talk. Here it is. Just type in Schwartz Paradox of Choice into YouTube, and you'll get this one. Has 5.9 million views. It's about 20 minutes long. And yeah, it's 17 years old, so it's one of the earlier TED Talks. And just watch this thing from start to finish. It'll be really good. Once you're done with that, you can come back and finish this slide. So economic maximizing requires efficient markets. But most of humankind has never had efficient markets. For example, prehistoric farmers did not have efficient markets. They just bartered and stuff. So at the end of the day, economic laws are not like gravity. Gravity requires no defense because it's unchangeable. It always acts the same on matter. Economics are not like that. They're more like traffic laws. Traffic laws do predict people's behavior, just like gravity predicts the falling of a bowling ball. And so people behave according to economic laws. They maximize and stuff like that mostly. But if these economic laws have bad outcomes, however we would define a bad outcome for human flourishing, we as a society are guilty of choosing poor economic laws. We should change the economic laws, just like we could change our traffic laws. You know, if we had an intersection where there was always a backup, we could change the light cycle to help with that somehow. Or we could make another road nearby. You know, we could change the traffic situation. And we can change the economic situation if we think that the particular economic laws that are being enacted in our society right now are not good. And I think we've talked a little bit about how they're not. They essentially encourage us to be very greedy. And we talked about last time how the people with a lot of money are the ones that are an advantage at an advantage for producing demand for their products in the populace by, you know, having a lot of money to do marketing. So it's not really a fair system that we have right now, and it's a system that really promotes greed. So we should definitely change our laws. Another Barry Schwartz TED Talk that you can pause and watch.
That their future is already written.
I have to wait for this ad so I can show you what it looks like.
Into their own hands.
Okay. So this is a Barry Schwartz, Why Justice Isn't Enough. If you type that into YouTube.
So
this is an excellent TED Talk. Make sure you watch this. Really important critique on capitalism. And, you know, it has to do with college admissions and stuff he talks about, but also he applies that to the economy in general. And he thinks he has a solution to change our traffic laws so that our society is better. So make sure you see that and get what his solution is. And we can talk about it together, but I want you to have watched it. So I'm looking at the clock here. I've been talking for 24 minutes in this video, and I've also had you pause twice and watch 20-minute videos of Schwartz. So we're really up to over an hour already in this video. I'm going to try to keep on boogieing and finish this whole thing in like an hour and a half. So go no more than another half an hour in this video. All right. So our final critique, we've already done economics and evolutionary biology. Now we're going to talk about behaviorism. So this is a big one. So we must distinguish. Again, this is critiquing science on scientific grounds. We must distinguish whether behavior is controlled by the principle of reinforcement or behavior can be controlled by the principle of reinforcement. That is really big. So Skinner thinks all behavior is controlled by that. And he has these pigeons that he's trained to play ping pong and stuff that, he can prove it with. But just because the pigeons may be controlled by the principle of reinforcement doesn't mean you and I are in our day-to-day lives. So, looks like I got an evolution slide stuck in here with the behaviorism. Hang on a sec. Let's talk about this one. Sorry, brief return to evolution. This is actually a really good point. I just put the slide in the wrong place. Here's a problem. Why do we fight wars? Is it for greed or aggression? Those are the selfish genes, to make sure we're passing on our genes? Probably not. For the individual soldier. Soldiers fight wars. They go to war and potentially die for honor or love or guilt. Like, I'm going to feel guilty if all my buddies go to war and I don't go with them. These are reasons that people go to war. It's not for selfish genes. So war is a pretty big deal in life. Hopefully not for any of us watching this video, but for some generations, war is the defining thing in life for everybody. So it's a really big deal in history, and evolution may not have the strongest argument for, why people go to war. Maybe you could explain it with altruism stuff that we talked about. But. All right, so getting back to behaviorism. I mentioned we have to distinguish whether behavior is controlled by reinforcement or it can be. The problem here is the impoverished environment of operant chambers. So yes, when you're in a box and there are only 3 things in there that you can do, which are press a lever, sit there, or sniff around, if like you're a pigeon and you're in one of these Skinner boxes like this, then yes, it's easier to control behavior with reinforcement. And so some of the greatest applications of behavior theory are in carefully contrived environments. For example, ABA, applied behavioral analysis for individuals with autism, are in carefully controlled environments where you can give people, give a child with autism reinforcement if they do well, if they do their learning, but withhold it if they don't. That can work to shape people's behavior. Just like you can shape this pigeon's behavior, make him turn around or make him peck on the floor all the time. If every time he pecks on the floor, you open this little thing that has food in it for him. So you can do that, but here's the problem. For human beings in complex environments, what will count as the reinforcer, and for whom? In our environments, we have access to many reinforcers. Water, water is pretty reinforcing. You die if you don't have it. Sex, caffeine, cocaine, opiates, playing badminton, getting to gaze at a sunrise, work itself can be reinforcing, feeling connected with God can be reinforcing. All these things are reinforcing. Which one is going to be the reinforcer that controls my behavior right now? Behaviorism can't tell us. And since all those reinforcers are at my disposal, if behaviorism can't tell me which one of these I'm going to pursue, then it's not as powerful as it first seemed, I think. So a lot of life is, which reinforcer are you going to pursue? And there's been studies criticizing behaviorism where they give animals a more rich environment than just a box with a hole in it. And, like they let the pigeon live in the wild or something like that, or monkeys or whatever. And they're much less determined by the reinforcer if they have a richer environment like we have. We have a very rich environment with many good things in it. The other thing with behaviorism is, do we really want to think think in terms of reinforcement and behavior shaping all the time? For example, my daughter, Clementine, shown there in the picture drinking her tea with her brother Henry. This is a few years ago now. My kids have really grown up since this picture. It's probably 3 or 4 years ago. But that's her being sweet and having some tea in bed, snuggled up. She's a sweet kid, and I love her so much. But she does have these tantrums, and usually it's about bedtime. She wants to actually be doing what she's doing in that picture, which is snuggle with mommy, especially in our bed. And, that's not good. We want our own space in bed. It's nice to snuggle with her, but, eventually we want to have our own space in bed. So we need to get her out of there. So sometimes when we do that, she has a tantrum, and she will flip out for a long time, like scream, and bang on the door. We have to shut the door of her room and lock her in there, hold the knob. It doesn't actually have a lock, so I have to hold the knob while she tries to escape. And she's 7 now, so this is pretty rare now, but she used to do this quite regularly. So with behaviorism, if my wife and I are both, trained in behaviorism. I'm a psychologist, and she used to work at an ABA school, Applied Behavioral Analysis School. She's an occupational therapist. She knows more about behaviorism than I do. So we used to try to train Clementine with these tantrums, and get her to not do tantrums. And what you're supposed to do is just be stone cold and not give her any reinforcement for the tantrum. But it's tough because sometimes she'd be doing a tantrum for quite a while, and we'd be stone cold killers and not giving her any reinforcement, not letting her in the bed. Certainly, what a lot of parents want to do is give the kid, let the kid fine, come in the bed. Or like if they're having a tantrum at the grocery store and you're being embarrassed in front of everyone about how bad of a parent you are because your kid's flipping out, just give them a lollipop or something like that so that they shut up and they stop embarrassing you. But that's reinforcing the tantrum, and that's going to produce more tantrums in the future, is the idea, according to behaviorism, which my wife and I both believe. So we try to be these, hardcore behaviorist parents to some degree and not reinforce the tantrums. But then there's these times where, like, she's tantruming for several minutes, and then she just starts whimpering like a poor thing and says, "I just feel so lonely," or something like that. A poor little girl, And your heart just goes out to her. And if you're a stone cold behaviorist, you're not going to go in there because you don't want to reinforce this whole thing, this whole tantrum. You don't want her to do that again, but you love her. And sometimes for us, we do the wrong thing behaviorally, because we think that she needs to know that she's loved when she's upset, So I think for a lot of people, you don't really want to live in pure reinforcement behavior shaping mode all the time. For us, we break out of that sometimes. We try to be strict and not reinforce tantrums, but we sometimes don't, and we think that's the right thing to do. Not saying that other people need to do that too, but you can consider for your own life whether you'd always want to be a strict behaviorist. I do recommend not giving the lollipops at the grocery store, though. I think behaviorism has a lot to offer, but do you really want to always think like that? Okay. Another problem with behaviorism is that it's an inadequate understanding of motivation. So since all action is done to get reinforcement, behaviorism can't account for intrinsic motivation. What if the operant is intrinsically enjoyable? For example, why would a car mechanic go home and work on his cars at night as a hobby? Some people do that. They're car mechanics, and then they have the little car they tinker on for fun when they go home. Behaviorists and rational economic man thinks work is pure disutility, right? So you go to work just to get the reinforcer, which is the money. So it doesn't make sense that you go home and work on your car as a hobby, but some people do that. So that's tough for behaviorism to explain. Further, if you're not a car mechanic, this might be even more applicable. Good career advice is, you've probably heard this before, figure out what you love to do and then find someone dumb enough to pay you to do it. That's tough to explain for behaviorism because you're supposed to be doing work that, the reinforcer is the money. I guess maybe not. Maybe behaviorism can deal with aspects of your work being reinforcing. But it's pretty confusing at the least. Okay. Getting back to why we work, or continuing on with that, Schwartz critiques Adam Smith's assumptions of motivations to live at ease. Smith thought that people wanted to be lazy and quote unquote live at ease and just sit on the couch. An alternative perspective to that is from Karl Marx. I think I mentioned this to you guys in class already. Marx said, we don't work to eat, we eat to work. In other words, imagine if you had the opportunity to sit on the couch all day, every day, for your whole life. Would you want to do that? Or how long do you think it would take you to be like, I want to do something. I want to build something. I want to make an impact on the world in some way. I want to build a hut in the backyard for shelter or whatever, or I want to go help someone, I think we want to work. I don't think that rational economic man is a proper model. I think Marx is right that we don't work just to eat, to get money to eat. We eat so that we can work. Work is part of one of the most important things we do as human beings, the thing we really want to do deep down. So that's another good criticism. If we reinforce with external rewards, we can kill some of the intrinsic enjoyment of work, though. So there's this puzzle study you guys have probably heard from Intro Psych or something, where, but maybe not, I'll tell you real quick. There's this study where they had people do like a puzzle, and then they, like a jigsaw puzzle or something, I think. And then they said, how much did you enjoy that? And it was like, they'd rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, and say it was like a 6.5 out of 10. They said they enjoyed the puzzle. It was pretty good. And then they had another sample of people that they did the same exact thing, but they said, here's a puzzle. Can you do a puzzle for us for a while? And by the way, I'm going to give you $5 for doing the puzzle. So they did the puzzle, and then they asked those people how much they enjoyed the puzzle, and they said 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. So presumably it's the fact that they got paid for doing the puzzle made them think ugh, I have to do this puzzle. It sucks. I'm working so hard for this $5 or some, framework like that. And so it kind of ruined at least their rating of the intrinsic enjoyment of doing the puzzle. The puzzle was fun. People rated it a 6.5 out of 10 when they weren't paid, but getting paid made them enjoy it less. The notion of the pin factory. I talked about this. If we all work in a pin factory, we can make way more pins than any of us could if we were just making pins solo. Digging the iron ore and stuff I was talking about. Remember that? And it's true, we can generate more wealth with specialization, but Adam Smith himself said people who work in pin factories, specialized factories like that, will become as dumb as it is possible for a human being to become. That's basically what he said. He meant to use the word dumb, but it was a word like that. So it might generate a lot of wealth, but is it a life you want to live, to be working in the pin factory, 10 hours a day, generating all this wealth and becoming, very dull in your mind? I wouldn't want to do that. Another problem is an unsatisfying explanation of Skinner's own behavior, the behaviorist's own behavior. So when you ask B.F. Skinner why he believes in his own theory, he would say, I've been reinforced for believing in my theory. That's why he believes in his theory. Okay. Maybe. But he probably also thinks it's true and it has logic behind it and stuff. It's not just that he's been reinforced for it. It's not a very satisfying explanation. So Skinner, Descartes, and Hume have something in common. All three of them were trying to do something big and great. All three thought that their insights applied to everything. Descartes thought, thinking was important, would change the world, would change human beings. We were going to be masters and possessors of everything. Skinner thought, he wrote this book about how we could create a utopia based on behaviorist principles. But all three positions, rationalism and skepticism / empiricism and behaviorism, will get you into trouble and lead to a distorted view of the world. So the last thing I'll leave you with is economic imperialism. And then we can discuss these things, in, say, the first half of next class. But I've introduced you to a bunch of stuff. So economic imperialism means economic man advancing his empire into the territory of love, family, and recreation. So economic man, rational economic man that we've talked about, is supposed to be just for economics, for like your business decisions that you make. But it's imperialism, was like when England took over the part of the what is now the United States, this empire, colonization, That's what this is saying, is economic principles are beginning to colonize or spread their empire to your love life. So who are you going to marry? You can think of that as rational economic man or woman, How much does she make? How much money is she likely to make? And therefore, how many, vacations a year am I going to be able to go on? How good looking is she? How nice is she? You can try to maximize your wife or husband. Do you really want to do that? Do you want to be thinking economically about things like love and family? He talks about the problem of the commons. If we all act in self-interest in these formerly non-economic domains like love and family, what impacts will this have? The problem of the commons is that if it's the idea that a town has a common, and like a common was a patch of grass, in the middle of the town, basically. And back in the old days, everybody was a farmer, so and everybody had their own goats and sheep and stuff, okay, or cows. And what goats and sheep and cows eat? They eat grass. So everybody has their livestock eating their grass on their own property, right? That's the right thing to do. I'll have my cows, eat my own grass. Thank you very much. I'm not going to send them onto your property to eat your grass. That would be immoral. But I'll tell you something. The town common is a nice little patch of grass. Nobody's really using it for livestock feed. So if I slip out there in the night and let out old Bessie to have a snack in the town common, no one's really going to be hurt by that. Because it's not like she's going to eat the whole thing. She's going to eat a little bit, and no one's going to notice it. You're still going to be able to go out there and play soccer in the town common. There's plenty of grass for that, even if old Bessie has a little snacky poo at midnight. Nobody's the wiser. So it makes sense, economically speaking, for me to let old Bessie out and have a little grass in the town common. That's the problem of the commons. Because, you know why it's a problem? Because it makes sense for just me to do it. But if everybody does it, guess what we don't have anymore? It's called a common. Because if everybody's cow is out there at midnight thinking nobody's looking and eating the grass, all the grass is going to be gone and we're not going to have a common anymore. So the commons problem is one of these situations where if one person does it, it's fine. But if everybody does it, it's a big freaking problem. And there's a lot of things like that with this. Like if we all act in self-interest in the domain of love and family and recreation, I'll ask you, maybe we can talk about it next time. What impacts will that have? I think it would definitely have some. It's sort of like an alcoholic. It's a similar type of dynamic where, someone who, alcoholic isn't an official term anymore, but I actually don't think it ever was in like diagnostic books or whatever. But, someone who has a problem with drinking might decide, might be thinking about, should I give up drinking, altogether? And the problem is that any one drink isn't a big deal. Should I have a beer tonight or one more beer tonight? Sure. One more is not going to make a difference in my life. One more beer, not a problem. The problem is that then after that beer, you can make the same decision of one more beer again. And that can keep happening for the rest of your life, is one more beer. So at some point you need to make this like firm line in the sand that like, if I have one more beer, I'm going to die. Or like, convince yourself that one more beer is just, it has to end now for some reason, that one more beer isn't okay. Even though one more beer probably would be okay, but for you, that one more beer represents continuing on this cycle of doing one more beer many, many times. Sort of like that with economic imperialism. Am I going to think about maximizing stuff with my love life or my family life or my recreational life? If you do it with this one decision, is it going to make a difference? No, probably not. But if you keep doing it, it's going to create a life that's going to feel pretty different from the non-economic stuff of life that is usually there for love and family and recreation. All right. I think I'll stop there. So we had this 45-minute video plus the 2 20-minute TED Talks, and we'll review this next time, and we'll review all the stuff that we've talked about in class for our exam, which will be, I think, a week from Thursday. October 3rd is when the exam will be. All right, thanks for your attention, getting through this whole boring video. Wish I could have given it to you in person, but looking forward to talking with you about it on next class.